All right, awesome. Hi, everyone. Just gonna wait one more minute for a couple of people to get in from the waiting room. Awesome. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I would like to begin by first acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am currently speaking to you from, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm so pleased to be here with you all tonight for this discussion of Lauren Ho's novel Last Tang Standing. Before I hand you over to our speakers this evening, I just want to really quickly reiterate some of the information that you were sent in the email with your link to join tonight's event. So you have all automatically been placed on mute and you'll remain so throughout the evening, but that doesn't mean that Lauren isn't keen to answer your questions. She definitely is. It just might look a little bit different to some of the other online events you've attended. So the way that we do question time at Avid Reader is that you send them through to me using the chat box. If you can't see it right now, it should be towards the lower left of your screen. Don't worry if you still can't find it, because I will be posting the link to purchase your copies of Last Tang Standing shortly, and that will make the chat box pop up, and that is the place that you type your questions. They will come straight through to me, and then once I'm asked to do so, I will begin reading them out. So start sending those through as you think of them, and I'll get through as many as I can at the end of the event. And so I would now like to introduce Lauren Ho. Lauren is a reformed legal counsel who writes funny stories. Hailing from Malaysia, she lived in the United Kingdom, France, and Luxembourg before moving with her family to Singapore, where she is ostensibly working on her next novel. Last Tang Standing is not based on her mother at all, seriously. In conversation with Lauren tonight, we have Donald Tran. Donald is a tastemaker, influencer, and socialite whose adventures you can follow on Instagram via the handle @thefella-from-Melbourne. I will share that in the chat box as well for you all. And so, Lauren and Donald, it is now my absolute pleasure to hand over to you both for tonight's discussion.
Emma, thank you so much, and a big hello to Miss Lauren Ho. How are you?
Hey guys, thank you so much, Emma, Kate, and obviously Donald. I'm really pleased to be here and excited to discuss the book and my journey as an author for anyone who's interested. So let's get the whole thing started.
Indeed. First and foremost, how is Miss Lauren Ho? Like, where is she at in the world at the moment?
Well, currently, if I'm going to be really specific, I'm in a hotel undergoing quarantine in Singapore. So I have the glamorous part and the not so glamorous part. The glamorous part is I'm in Singapore again, but the not glamorous part is I'm eating hotel food from like plastic boxes. So
oh dearie me. Hopefully there'll be Uber Eats somewhere available for you though, right, Lauren?
Yeah, there is. So I'm really grateful to be back in Singapore from Malaysia. So yeah, very grateful.
Well, great. So can you introduce yourself to the readers and the viewers and all that as well? Who is Lauren Ho? I mean, like, I know Emma Kate already touched base on it as well, but who is Miss Lauren Ho, and how did you get about with writing The Last Tang Standing? What was the inspiration behind it?
Okay. Well, as Emma Kate very adequately introduced me, I am actually a Malaysian author. I was a legal counsel for some time in my life until I decided that like I didn't really like it anymore, and so I stopped. I stopped, and to the wrath of my family. No, I'm just kidding. They they had no say in it. They I basically began working in the humanitarian sector as it was my first love in the beginning. So I worked with Doctors Without Borders for a few years, and in the meantime, because I was in the humanitarian sector, I often felt a need to de-stress at the end of the work day because it can get very overwhelming in a different way from like my work as a lawyer. And what I did like a few years ago when I was still in Singapore, well, I'm in Singapore again, but back then. I started trying my hand at stand-up comedy, which
Right.
is for a lot of people who knew me back then was very surprising because I love stand-up comedy as an art form, but I have terrible stage presence. So so I survived the first few months just being so terrible on stage because people were just so nice to me. I was like the baby deer in the forest that, you're like, oh, she's trying. Let's not shoot her right now.
Well, you must have done something right for lasting this long, though, haven't you? Right?
I did for 2 years. I was an open micer. I got good enough that I had like a 5-minute set that I could do with a couple of our friends for
Good.
some paid events.
Yep.
But yeah, I did it because I loved comedy. I love comedy, and I think it shows in the book because a lot of the material that I tried on stage, I managed to distill it in the book because a lot of my sets were about being an Asian woman and the expectations that society places on us. So yeah.
Yeah. Right. So you've actually touched on my next question as well, because you know how you were like a stand-up comedy before, or you could still be right now as well. Has it influenced the way that you write the books and your novels and your work as well?
Okay, sure. I mean, it's a good question. Um, I think before I tried my hand at stand-up comedy, I mean, I used to consume a lot of stand-up comedy, but
Mm.
I mean, performing it is different because it kind of rewires your brain to think in a certain way, and you have to be. I think with stand-up comedy, it kind of forces you to be bolder in some aspects o- o- of um of just being you. I had to be bolder as a person. I had to be more relaxed as a person because things don't go your way on stage when you're an
Yeah.
amateur. you know People start heckling you, someone cries in the audience. No, no, that never happened to me, but you know what
Good.
I
Well, I'm
mean.
glad because it sounds very intense, and I'm like, oh no, Lauren.
But you know what I mean. Like things don't go the way you plan, and you just have to roll with it. And I think these are just very good lessons for life in general. I mean,
Mm.
rolling with punches, right? I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and
Yeah.
I just think that like being a stand-up comic has just been really good for me as just a human being, and also as a writer because it trains you to sort of think outside the box, and that
Yeah.
has helped because I was very much like thinking that I was a literary writer in the beginning, and I do have um, some publishing credits slash um, awards with international writing fiction writing competitions, but I never really thought of myself as being a comedic writer until I tried stand-up comedy.
Yeah. So with that being said, it's quite different being an author and being a comic, a stand-up comic as well, and with your backgrounds and all that as well. How did you make the leap over to becoming an author? Like how? I mean, it's amazing, and I've actually read the books as well. But like, how did you actually make the leap into the literature world?
Um, so as I mentioned just now, I've always written. I've been a short story writer for some time, and I've had a couple of pieces published in
Mm,
local publications. And
right.
basically, I always thought that one day I would finish like a novel. I just didn't really have the head space or time when I was
Mm,
in law.
yeah.
And so when I quit law and I worked in the humanitarian sector, I actually had time to write. So in 2017, I started and completed Last Tang Standing, sort of like
Mm,
as a personal challenge as well, because my husband told me like, oh, you've been telling me ever since I met you, like X number of years ago that you would write a novel one day, and I'm still now we're here. It's 2017, write a damn novel. No, he didn't say it that way, but he just said like, finish the damn thing, like do
yeah.
something. And I was like, challenge accepted. and so and so I wrote the whole thing. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm very
love is
competitive.
like a battlefield, isn't it? Right by the sound of it. A friendly one, of course, but it
Friendly
sounds like
one, yes.
battlefield. Now, I do
Yes,
have a really
so
I really do have a really tricky question for you, all right, in regard to the Last Tang Standing.
Okay.
Is this book really, really not based on your mum? What's going on there? I mean, I read it, but I'm like, your mum sounds amazing, but like, is it really not based on your mum? What's the inspiration behind there, Lauren? Enlighten us.
Well, every single writer I know has this party line that we stick to, which is like all the characters in our books are fictional.
Yeah.
And since my mom is, I think, on like perhaps watching this, I don't know. She says that she would be.
Oh,
I would
yeah,
like to state for the
definitely.
record, it's not based on my mom, but definitely there are like a lot of I mean, I draw a lot of inspiration from my own real life experiences and obviously from the experiences of friends and family. So, um, I mean, it's a very authentic book in its own way. And I try to make sure that when I portray people in the book, I try to draw from people I know or like real life
Yeah.
characters
Yeah.
that I know of
Yeah.
and keep it real.
Well, I mean, with that being said, what do you think about representation in publishing these days? So, what are your hopes and dreams for, a wider representations for the world out there?
Um, so that's a good question. I mean, obviously, Last Tang Standing is one of a handful of novels that is written
Mm,
first in English and set in this part of the world, so
mm,
like in Southeast Asia, and published by a big five publisher in the US.
yes. Mm,
So there aren't that many books currently by Asian authors that are set outside of the States or even the UK that's written in a contemporary setting and set in Asia. So there are not that many. Obviously, when we think of a recent example, we all think of Crazy Rich Asians, right? And Sex and Vanity by Kevin Kwan, who I
mm,
adore. Um, but there aren't that many of us, and I'm just really glad right now that there's this push in publishing to sort of like let in more own voices authors. So
mm,
own voices is a movement to let authors who are from more so-called marginalized identities
mm,
present their voices in publishing. And so there's a definite push in publishing and a definite like interest from readers as well to consume media from own voices authors. And that's partly the reason why I actually have a platform today to be published in the US and internationally. So
yeah. Um,
I'm really glad this is happening because
yeah.
it's time.
Yeah.
It's time.
Well, I mean, like, in terms of creating awareness, especially awareness within like different cultures, I am all for it. But it is amazing to actually get to understand and see the point of view from somebody from that culture as well. You've actually touched base on my next question about own voices fictions, right? But before I go into that department, how did you get published? How did you get Last Tang Standing from being something that you write for yourself into one of the big five publishings? Like, how do you get published? Really, that's the simpler question.
Okay. That's a good question. For anyone who's interested in becoming a published author. So my path to publication was very much quite traditional in the sense that, I got an agent first, and then I got published. But just for like your background, I don't have an MFA. I don't have any creative writing um, uh, background in the sense that I didn't attend any programs for it. And so, being based in Asia as well, we're not really plugged into the ecosystem that is like the US publishing, which would have helped, when you're trying to get an agent and to sell your book. Um, so for me, I knew that I had a product that was, and I don't like the word product, but I think product is a good word to use in this context. I knew that I had a product that was that the market would be interested in reading about because it's a book that is really timely. I mean, I don't see a lot of comparisons for similar novels out there, at least for books that are set here in Asia. And so I knew that it was funny. I mean, I think it's funny. I hope it's funny. And I thought like
Really
it was.
funny. You guys really should be getting onto the
Thank
Last
you.
Tang Standing. But
Thank you.
affirmative, it's really funny.
Thank you, Donald. You're very nice. I knew it was really funny, and it was talking about issues that like many people from all over the world, even if they're not like Southeast Asian, would
Mm,
definitely be able to identify with, especially if they're from like a immigrant background, like
mm,
my family was, and if you're Asian, it's. I mean, to just give you an example, my editor, the editor that like acquired my book, she's Jewish, and my editor in the UK who acquired the rights to my book from the UK, she's black, black British, and so they wrote to me and they said like I find so many elements of your book so common to my household and to my
yeah.
background as well. And so I think that like a lot of the cultural elements discussed in Last Tang Standing are not foreign to most readers, even if they're not necessarily Asian or from this part of the world.
Yeah. And like, I understand that this book is actually been written from your point of view, right? As a Chinese Malaysian
Yes.
individual. But I totally agree and I totally understand where you're coming from. As long as you have some sort of like story behind you, you can sort of like identify bits and pieces, into your own personal life as well. Now, I understand that own voices is a term coined by the writer Corinne Duvis. Excuse my pronunciation, it's not that great, and do correct me if I'm wrong as well, all right? And it refers to an author from a marginalized or underrepresented, excuse me, I'm reading from my script as well, underrepresented groups writing about their own experiences from their own perspective as well, rather than somebody from outside perspective writing as a character. How do you feel about the authors who write outside of their groups? And should a writer only write about he or she knows? So, what's your
Oh.
thoughts on the whole thing?
There's a lot of controversy going on with that, especially in the US publishing world. Like, there's some authors are saying that you should stick in your lane. You should only write from your cultural background, and when you're writing in that cultural background, you have to be really careful and things like that. And to some extent, I do kind of agree. I think we're at the stage where with this definite space for more own voices authors to be published, there should definitely be, more own voices authors that are championed by the publishing industry. Um, and we should allow them to be the ones that write about their own experiences. However,
Mm,
I've never been one to say if you're from this identity, you should only write characters from this identity,
mm,
or vice versa, because I find that that can be very limiting, and
yeah,
I'm not sure that's necessarily the right way to go forward as well. I do think that there should be space for people who might want to write. I mean, because at what point do you say stop, right? Do you say like, oh, if you're a man from you're a cishet man, you shouldn't necessarily write
about in a woman's
about.
point, right?
Yes, I mean
Yeah,
that's taking it to the extreme, but obviously there is a need to carve out space, and there's a need to champion own voices narratives,
yeah,
and they should be from own voices authors where you can. But I personally believe, and this is just me speaking for myself, I personally believe that a person who wants to write characters outside of their own identities should not be punished if they do so, so long
yeah,
as they do it with care and they exercise adequate
like,
common
yeah,
sense and respect for what they're writing. If they're writing someone else's perspective, I just
yeah,
don't believe in blanket saying like no means no, you should stick to your lane. So this is a very complicated discussion, and there's just so many layers, especially for certain marginalized identities.
yeah,
I mean, I totally understand
mm,
if there is a lot of protectionism. I think of it as protectionism
mm,
for these kind of books, because um, maybe in the past there's just so little space for these identities to speak openly about their
Yeah.
narratives and their lived experiences. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I never believe in just saying there should be a blanket rule that everybody else should just, stick to what they know. So I
Yeah.
just think it's a matter of common sense and a matter of dialogue. Yeah.
You've actually, like, you're ticking all the right boxes. I mean, for what it is, at least it's opening up discussions, though, isn't it? Right? And it's
Yes.
creating awareness. I mean, like, as long as you are doing it in a common sense way, like you said, and as long as it's well thought out, it's creating awareness, really. And it's opening up dialogues about between different groups from different, you
Mhm.
know, areas of lives as well. And now that we've talked about diversities as well, your books and Kevin Kwan's works actually comes in a very good time, because especially in this day and age, there's a lot of talk about
Mhm.
diversities, and there has always been talked about diversities within like the last decade or so, but it has actually become much more visible over the last few years, the few recent years actually. How does your novel fit into the schema, into the scheme?
Um, well, that's a really good question. I think we're just at like the beginning of a wave. If you want to look at it like as a wave, I think I'm just one voice that's writing about very specific experience, because I
Mm,
am writing about a Chinese, a rather privileged Chinese Malaysian lawyer that's working in Singapore.
mm,
Um, Her friends are relatively well off, or if they're not well off, they're coming from a good background. No matter what you call, I don't know what you call good, but here you go.
general, yeah.
Exactly. So there is an element of privilege inherent in the narrative that I'm talking about, even if they're not like from a very cloistered, very uber wealthy background like the characters in Kevin Kwan's books are. But I do think that they um, inhabit a very privileged space in itself. That being said, I do think that like at least for my book, I tried to make sure that the identities that I put in the book, like there are two half Pinoy characters, there are two half
Mm,
Filipino characters in there. I tried to ensure that like we were showing diversity in the cast, and there
yeah.
there is potentially an interracial romance. I try to ensure that these voices, when they're represented, are
Mm,
represented well. The problem is because there are just so few books by authors from this part of the world. I do feel the weight of representation very heavily.
yeah.
I do feel that like there are always going to be readers that like find a specific element of my book to be maybe not palatable, because they feel
Mm,
like I should have done it another way to show good rep. But I feel like that's judging the book really harshly, because it is
yeah.
only one book representing a specific narrative within,
Yeah.
so many possible narratives. And I think that the problem is with own voices authors, there is a heavier responsibility to get representation right. And I feel it
Yeah.
very much. Um, and I do think that like readers also should understand that it is only one voice out of
Mm,
many possible voices that will come out from this region,
yeah.
and to be understanding and supportive of what we're writing, because we can't be perfect. And in fiction, I mean, perfect characters are never interesting to read about, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, we're speaking of The Last Tang Standing, right? Going back into your novels and your work as well, is there a character that you have created that ended up surprising you the most because of the decisions they made?
Okay. Um. Yeah. Well. Like there is a backstory. So before, when I first started like shopping my book around, when I was looking for an agent, my book actually was maybe 30% different, maybe even 40% different from the one that you see on the shelves.
Yeah.
We had a totally different ending. It had like, it was much more um, vague in the way it was structured. And I must say that the editorial process has also made me a more mature author in terms of technique, because it forced me to confront certain maybe inadequacies in my own craft.
Mm,
Because writing a novel is very different from writing short stories. And short stories, I think I'm very comfortable writing short stories, but writing a novel, it's a whole different beast, right? And
yeah.
And so for me, the book has gone through several iterations, even after it was acquired by my editor. I was still like noodling around with the book, and at one point she was just like, "Give me the damn manuscript. You're not gonna change anything anymore."
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, it can be better." I had to like suppress that so-called perfectionist tendencies of mine, to sort of just like trust my editor and hand the book over and just close my eyes, because it's a lot of it is about surrender and surrender of control, and
Mm,
that's something I learned as well during this process.
yeah,
Yeah, it's an important lesson to learn.
I think so too. Speaking about, the process of writing your novel as well, do you believe in writer's block? How about reader's block? Like, do you believe in the whole thing anyway?
There's definitely I'll tell you that there's definitely reader's block. I think I think sometime in the second and third month of like lockdown in Malaysia,
Ooh.
I found it really hard. I was in a reading slump. I found it really hard to finish books. And then the first month and a half, I was just like, yeah, this is the time, I can read whatever. And I read so many books. I read for me was like 10 books in 6 weeks. For me, that was a lot.
Yeah,
I hadn't had so much time to read in a long time, right?
yeah,
But definitely I think like there's there's a there's definitely readers fatigue or readers slump. I don't know how bookstagrammers do it. My hats off to them because they read so many books, and I sometimes feel like it's really tough to go through so many books. But yeah, so for writer's block, there's a very simple solution to it. Ignore it. So if you're feeling stuck, and you're trying to get a piece of work done, my advice to any authors out there who are facing this is just to
Mm,
put your pen down and like write something else or watch TV and take a walk and come back, or start like just freestyling, because
yeah,
that helps you unblock the writer's block as well. Yeah, I don't think you should allow yourself to believe in writer's block, is what I'm
yeah,
saying, because once you believe in it, it becomes real, and then the fear, I call it the
yeah.
fear, takes over.
Uh,
So yeah.
Lauren, do you know what? I might have to call you Oprah from now on because that could be applied with
No,
life in general. I'd say that's very deep, very wise. So
thank
we
you.
might have to call you the Chinese Malaysian Oprah from now on. I'd say.
I dare not take that mantle, but okay.
Now, speaking of COVID, how has it been changed? Like, has it impacted the way that you do your work in your writing process, or like, has it affected you in any way at all in regards to your work as well?
um so I've been a full-time writer since 2019, like
Mm,
mid 2019, when I moved from Singapore to Malaysia.
yeah,
And I think the biggest change I saw with COVID was not so much impacting the writing process, but maybe just what I had expected the debut author process to look like. Because I mean, just for background, I mean, Last Tang Standing was supposed to hit Australia, I think a full month before it actually launched, which is like in October. So the pandemic has just impacted like books debuting this year so much.
right.
And I mean, I feel so much for bookstores as well. I mean, like indie bookstores,
Yeah,
everyone's just like struggling. And books are just such a comfort. And if anyone out here is just like listening and they're thinking what to get for Christmas, you should definitely get books and
yeah.
support indie bookstores.
And
Yeah.
yeah, no, I was gonna say the same thing, and I share the same sentiment with you as well, Lauren. I mean, like, we're not talking about like the big chain or anything, right? We're talking about like independent stores as
Yeah.
well. And coming from somebody who works in shopping centers or malls as well,
Hmm.
it's heartbreaking to see small businesses in general, such as the indie stores, going out of business because of COVID and everything as well.
Yeah,
So
it's really tough.
so quintessentially, I know that too well, and I share the same sentiment with you as well.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's a tough time for everyone, and my heart goes out to people who are suffering because of like shutdowns, lockdowns,
mm,
and things like that. Um, but yeah, just going back to bookstores, support your local indie bookstore.
that's
Any brick and mortar bookstore, actually, just support
yeah,
any brick and mortar bookstore
yeah.
with your business if you can.
Yeah. With your experiences, though, I wanted to go back into your experiences a little bit while finding like an agent and getting your work published as well. What
Hmm.
are some of the common traps for new authors?
Okay. Um, I don't know. I guess a common trap for new authors is just number one, not finishing your book. So
Yeah,
I think the first thing is you just need to finish your book and then go through the process of finding people who are interested in reading your book and to give you like honest feedback and
yeah.
start like polishing the manuscript before you shop it out. Um, the other trap, the other trap that most um, I would say aspiring authors face is never believing that their work is good enough, even though they feel like they have a talent or
Mm,
something special. Like
yeah,
I know sometimes like when you compare the manuscript that you've written with something that's published, you're like, oh, that's so much better. I mean, but keep in mind that most of the books that you've seen have gone through revisions, have gone through editorial
yeah,
feedback. So don't compare your work with a polished gem, right? You're the
yeah,
uncut gem.
yeah.
And so what I'm trying to say is that
We get
like
where you come from. Don't worry.
yeah, just if you have something and you believe in it, you have to find a way to get it out and to maybe get independent opinion, like non-biased opinion on it,
Yeah.
and then start shopping for an agent, which is not too difficult in this day and age because I had no connections in publishing and I
Mm,
basically just like cold submitted my manuscript to a bunch of people that I thought would be suitable for the kind
yeah,
of genre I was writing in. So I,
yeah,
I would say don't give up.
yeah. So speaking of, have you received any best advices?
About
Have,
writing or about
uh,
life.
let's stick with writings. While you're starting out your journey from the beginning to now, have you
Hmm.
received any good advices that you've kept until this day in regards
Oh,
to books publishing and all that?
yes. So anyone who's published, my number one advice to you is do not read your own reviews. This is super
Oh,
important.
yeah,
This is super important. And do not interact with anyone on Goodreads because, like, in the beginning, like in the first month or so, I was like, oh, someone wrote me an email. I should, someone wrote me a nice review. I should thank them. But then I realized from my fellow authors that actually interaction on Goodreads is actually a strict no-no. And I
mm,
didn't know that because nobody told me, right? I was like, oh, isn't this like a
yeah,
social media platform? So I used to thank people for like good reviews, and that's it, the strict limit. So I never got into like real trouble for that. I mean, knock wood.
yeah,
But I do know that there have been authors in the past who like debated with other people about their reviews, and they should never do that. Um,
yeah,
because the thing about like reviews, especially from readers, is that y- you can't change their minds. Like when we as readers, we come in with our own baggage, our own preconceived biases, our
mm,
own, whatever. We have a way of approaching literature that's different from someone else who's reading the exact same book. And
yeah,
so we're entitled to our own opinions, and we might see blind spots that maybe like the publishing team didn't see, but it's very unlikely, especially if there's been a huge editorial effort on the book. But the point is, like, you just have to roll with the punches, and this is something for this for me was like toughest part of the process because there were a lot of times when I received certain feedback from people. I was like shocked by some of the comments, like, but even like every single author has gone through the same process. But it was still like sometimes quite hard for me to accept that like someone might see something that you didn't necessarily think was in there. But that's like the biggest like the lesson that I've learned as an author is just basically don't read your reviews, and or
yeah,
let someone else read it and filter it to you, and
yeah,
you will keep your sanity that way. that's
yeah,
that's my number one advice to every single debut author I know. I always tell them, don't read Goodreads, don't read Goodreads, don't read Goodreads, don't interact on Goodreads, because I'm trying to prevent them from disaster. Because I do know that there have been some authors author friends of mine who
Mm.
had maybe naively defended their book
Yeah.
on Goodreads, and then it became like this whole massive thing, right?
Yeah.
But I don't interact with people on Goodreads at all.
Yeah. Now, going back to The Last Tang Standing as well, how would you describe your novels to those who haven't read the books yet?
Um, I think primarily just approach it as a comedic novel.
Mm.
It's a comedic novel with some elements of coming of age. I know it's like the character is in her early 30s. It doesn't sound like the typical coming of age
No.
group, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
but there are some elements in
Revelation.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A
because like
light
she's
bulb moment.
discovering herself, right?
Yeah.
She's maybe just all her life just gone through and followed a blueprint that someone set out for her to just like go through with, and she just never really thought for herself. And I know so many people who are my friends, like who went through the same thing, and then suddenly had this like whole midlife crisis and go like, ah, my life. So basically, I think of it more as a comedic coming of age novel with some romantic subplots, but to
Yeah.
me the romance is not like at the forefront.
Yeah.
So that's how I would describe Last Time Standing.
Oh, lovely. Well, do you know what? Like, I actually came up with my own little anecdote as well. So it's
Okay.
quintessentially Crazy Rich Asian meet with Bridget Jones' Diary with a twist of Sex in the City. Is that how you would describe it as well?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good like way of comparing the titles. Like these are good comp titles.
Yeah.
They're not
But
exactly the same, obviously, but
no,
yeah, they're good comp titles. Yeah.
yeah. Speaking of though, there's the reason why I brought that up actually. So
Oh.
when you're actually in the process of writing your books, right? Do you like avoid reading all the other publishing works within the same vein, or do you maximize all options just to get inspired by it, whatever you want to call them as well? So do you like avoid reading it so you can have a clearer head, or do you, you know, do your little research of books within the same vein as
Mm-hmm.
a source of inspiration or idea?
Oh yeah, good question.
Mm,
So for Last Time Standing, because I was writing in diary form, I
mm.
actually brought out all my old Adrian Mole diary novels,
Yeah,
and I just like read through them because I think that they're one of the funniest like examples of novels written in diary form.
yeah,
And yeah, I read through the whole series, I think, of like 5 or 6 books that I have, at least the ones that I had. And yeah, I read through Bridget Jones' Diary again, at least the first book, just to refresh my mind as to what like the limitations were in terms of the diary form what were. And I tried to make sure that like um yeah, I think my voice is quite distinct from Bridget
yeah,
Jones's or anyone else's. So there I don't think there's any like I wasn't afraid of getting influenced in terms of
yeah,
like voice, but
yeah.
definitely I read these novels, so I would draw inspiration in terms of like form.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds good. Now tell us a little trivia questions as well about your books. What is a fun or strange source of inspiration that ended up in your book? May it be a name, a location, a line of dialogues. What's a fun fact about your books?
Um that's a good one. So there is a comic strip that runs through my book that I made up for the book, and it's actually a fan favorite. A lot of people are asking me like, will there be more stories about these two characters? And
Yep.
I actually I actually got some inspiration from like comic books, and because I had to figure out like what I wanted these characters to have in terms of superpowers. So I
Mm,
did spend some time like thinking up the universe behind it and stuff like that. So yeah, that maybe is, yeah, I drew inspiration from comic books, which is weird,
yeah.
but yeah.
Which is amazing though. I mean, if you think about it, within the Asian world, right? Like comics is actually a very, it's a great source of inspiration as well. But in the Western world, it's true, like we have the Archies and all that. So in a
Hmm.
way, I can totally understand where you're coming from as well
Hmm.
with those. Now, I wanted to talk about you as a writer as
Hmm.
well. Um, if you have been the original author of any book, what would it have been and why?
So there is one particular novel that like, for me, was kind of life changing in the sense that I read it and I thought, this is such a great novel. I wish I could write something like that. So that novel is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy.
Yeah.
And I wish I had written that novel, but
Yeah.
obviously it's like, I love Arundhati Roy, and I just love uh, yeah, the cultures that she represented, the class struggles, the caste, the whole like caste, I would say, like, issues in India, and for me that was just like such an eye-opening book, and I really enjoyed that book. So if anyone hasn't read The God of Small Things, I recommend it
Yeah.
very much.
Would that be the first book that you read that made you really think, wow, I've got to write something like this? Or what was the first book that you read that really inspired you to become an author?
I think it was that book. Obviously, I mean, what I've written is completely different. It's a completely different genre, but in
Which
my
is understandable,
yeah,
you know?
in
Yeah.
my short stories, I tried to use the same kind of in the beginning when I was younger. I tried to emulate her style of writing for some
Yeah.
time, but then I grew out of it. But yeah, that was my book.
Yeah.
It still is my book. I love that book so much. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, what are you currently reading at the moment?
Oh, so the last book that I really, really enjoyed, well, the last few books, I'll just quote a few.
Mm,
I really enjoyed The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I
mm,
hope I'm saying her name right. Apologies if I'm not.
yeah.
I also read Francis Cha's If I Had Your Face, which was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And what was the last novel I read that I enjoyed? If you're looking for something funny, my fellow debut author, Pamela Solstrovic, I hope I'm saying her name right. I'm so sorry if I'm not Pamela, but her book Forever 51 is so funny. It's about a menopausal vampire um, who's like
uh,
on a journey to find
yeah.
atonement for her sins.
Oh my
I love
goodness.
it. It's
Now
so
you
funny.
sparked my interest in that book. I have to read it now, actually.
Yeah, it's called Forever 51. So if anyone
Yeah.
wants to read about a
That,
menopausal vampire,
right?
that's the
Is
book.
that even such a thing? Oh my goodness. I'm like, what's going on? I have to read it now, actually.
I'm glad you're gonna buy it. Well, I hope you get it.
Thank
It's a
you.
good book. Yeah.
Any other new writers that really grabs your interest lately?
Um, like, there's just so many good writers out
Yeah.
there. There are like debut authors. My fellow debut authors, Madhi Sinha, Sachni Patel. Um, yeah, these are all really good authors that basically are in the same genre, I would say, like
Yeah.
comedic women's fiction.
Mm.
So yeah, I recommend them.
Yeah. Now, going back to you, Lauren, what are you working on next? Like, what's next for Miss Lauren Ho?
I think you have to excuse me because I have to turn off the alarm that you might be hearing in the background. I don't know if you hear something, but I'll be right back. Sorry.
Cool, cool, cool.
It's okay.
How is everybody doing at the moment? I hope you guys are staying safe and well as well.
They can't speak back, unfortunately. Still on mute. But we've had a
Hello,
couple of
Emma
questions
K.
come through, so in maybe 5 minutes. Good.
So sorry about that. I think the
Yep.
hotel alarm was ringing.
All
Yeah.
good.
Sorry. Yeah, you were saying what books or what
Like,
materials
what do
I'm
you?
working on right now?
Yeah.
Was that the question?
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to write a book. I wasn't kidding on my bio. I am supposed to be working on my second novel. Um, my publishers really want me to write a standalone book. So I mean, I have kind of worked on the sequel, but my publishers want me to write a standalone novel next. So I'm kind of working on that novel, kind of. But I'm horribly distracted. I've recently discovered K dramas, and it's horrible because,
Oh, yes, the good old K drama, right? Can you believe
I
I
don't know.
watching that thing until I kind of got bored with it? What are you watching at the moment?
So I don't know how I got sucked in because I've been resisting for ages, right? And and I
That's me right now
recently
too. Don't worry.
I recently got introduced. No, I was recommended the world of the married, and yeah, I I lost a week of my life to that. So I just want to say, don't get started. Don't watch K dramas if you want. If you have a deadline, just don't get started. But that's kind of like what I'm watching right now.
Oh, do you know what? I could say the same thing about Netflix as well because I just smashed out Friends within
Oh
like a
no.
week. I know, and like
Seriously?
I know, and I was so behind with work and everything as well because like I'm one of those people that I do my work at night. Like that's when I do
Yes.
my best work,
Me too. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah,
so,
it's the
what
best
else?
time.
Like, what better times would you be watching K dramas or Netflix or Friends? It's when you have to do some work, right? So that
Yes.
gives you an excuse to not do any work. So I'm like, so what is going on there, right?
But you know, I try to tell myself that like when I watch K dramas, I'm actually learning how to write better plots.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. It's
And
research.
technically, you're learning a new language as well. So that's your justification, though, isn't it? Right? No? Okay. Well, that's my justifications anyway, Lauren.
Whatever you need to tell yourself, Donald.
Indeed, to not do any work. You're right. You're right.
Whatever you
Emma
need to
Kate,
tell
have I
yourself.
got one more minute? Have I got a few more minutes for one more question?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead and then we'll go to audience questions because we've had a few come through. So yeah.
Sounds good. Lauren, what is to come with the Last Tang Standing? Like, are we expecting a movie? What's going on? Enlighten us because I'm dying to know. And I need a movie for the Last Tang Standing, please.
I am in discussion with some people about potentially having a movie, but I mean, like nothing is signed. It's very early days. I would love to have a movie or a series, but I'm kind of particular about this. So any
Yeah.
adaptation has to be done well, or there's no point.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So yes, there are some. There is interest in the book to turn it
Yeah.
into like either a film or series. I've received some offers. I just need to work through the details, and if that happens, maybe we'll see a movie, maybe we might not, because as we know in Hollywood, nothing
It's
is
set on
guaranteed.
until it is in full productions, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Well, I mean, with
I'll
that,
let you all know if something does materialize, but
yeah,
nothing has yet. So
yeah. Well, I'm not gonna lie. I was obsessed with Crazy Rich Asians the trilogy until the movies came out, and then
yeah,
I read your books, and I was like, nah, forget Kevin Kwan. I'm all about Lauren Ho now. All right. So,
don't tell Kelvin you said that.
no, I won't. I mean, I say that with much love to Kevin,
Of
but
course,
you
I
know,
love Kevin.
Team Lauren all the way, I'd say.
Thank you. Thank you very
No,
much. That's very kind. Thank you.
got your back as always, sister. And Emma, Kate, I think I'm done with all the questions. I think.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you both so much for a great discussion. And we've had a few questions come through. I'll ask the first one from Anne. She said, who's asked about your how you felt about voicing your opinion, knowing that some South Asian cultures can be quite judgmental. And Anne says, I know this because I'm Southeast Asian.
Well, well, I think in the book in general, I approach it this way, right? As a writer, I try to make sure that when I portray people, I try to do it with authenticity, and that means that sometimes some characters are not portrayed good, in the sense that like they're not traditionally good or likable. And but I never believed in necessarily creating likable characters for the sake of pleasing an audience. I believe in creating a realistic and like plot coherent, if you
Yeah.
wish, characters. um Back to my earlier point about the weight of representation. So that's something that I've struggled with. So for example, if I criticized someone from a different background, like if my character criticized someone from a different background from my characters, sometimes some readers find that sensitive in the sense that like, oh, but you're criticizing someone else from a different background from you. Is that because that's how you think about all these people? And still for me, there's a danger in that because
Yeah.
um, yeah, because some readers find that to be sensitive, and
Yeah.
to such readers I would say, believe me, when my characters make certain points, they're not doing this as a way of criticizing an entire group of people.
Yeah.
They're talking specifically about that fictional character. And because I personally have very strong viewpoints on this. I believe that representation needs to be done well, and of course I'm still a
Yeah.
debut author, and I can never pretend to be the best representation. I mean, I can never pretend that my book will always be the best representation of every single um, identity in the book, but it will always be true to life. Like, is my mom a tiger mom? No, she's not. And when I say that like a lot of Asian moms are tiger moms, do I mean that like they're all tiger moms? No. What I'm trying to say is that like there might be unpleasant characteristics that some of my characters have in the book, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I'm trying to impute that on an entire group. This
Yeah.
is just on that fictional character. So for me, like that is something like I had to struggle with, because sometimes people read that and they go like, "Oh, but you're not giving good rep to all these identities or communities in your book."
Yeah.
When my intention as an author of this from this part of the world who loves multiculturalism, who myself am from a multicultural background
Mm.
and family, I feel this weight of representation very heavily, and I try my best to make sure that I give good rep, but also understand that good rep doesn't necessarily mean um, like like good rep in the sense that every character there will be likable or will be
Yeah.
perfect, because it doesn't work that way. We are all individuals, right? We all have our own
Yeah.
foibles, we all have our own like bad characteristics,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that I'm a representative of entire group of people, and so
Yeah.
people need to keep that in mind.
And
Yeah,
may I chime in with this as well? Like as
yeah,
readers as well, you have to put your critical hats on as well.
yeah,
And just because like an author what might be writing a certain way about a characters, it
yeah.
doesn't really necessarily mean that it reflects on the entire group as well. So
Mm-hmm.
like with me, like basically you have to put your thinking caps on and take it as a grain of salt and really try to understand where the author's coming from as well. So it's
Yeah,
not a bad reflection, or it's not a reflection in any way, but it's pretty much just like creating a discussion and awareness to a certain type, if to that characters really. So
yeah,
basically, like you just really have to take it as a grain of salt, generally speaking, and basically just have a ponder about it or have a discussion with your friends or your families as well, I'd say.
yeah. And to understand that at the end of it, it's a fictional character,
Yeah.
and that you need to understand that like the reason why you might feel very strongly about the way certain characters
Mm.
are represented is because you see so few of these characters in books. And
Yeah.
that goes back to my point about the whole thing about feeling the weight of representation so much, even in a comedic book. um but that being said, like I'll give you an example of when people are really happy with representation that breaks traditional bounds, if you wish. Like for
Mm.
example, two of my characters are Pinoy, or half Filipino, or Filipino, and I have a lot of love from Filipino readers who tell me like I'm so happy to see representation of my culture,
Yeah.
of people in Singapore working in professional high flying jobs, and I'm just so happy that I have that in your book. But you know what I mean? It's like I can please a certain group, and then like another group might say, "Hey, I don't like the
Yeah.
way you portray this character who's not being like very filial, or who's being too."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's always this like balance, and it's hard because I'm
Yeah.
not representing every member of that group, and I have
Yeah.
to stress that again.
with fiction stories and with authors in general, like it's sort of like it's the catch-22. I find you might please like certain groups, but you might have a heated discussion with the others as well. I find so you like generally, I think authors do the best that they can as long as it's thought out and with a well-intentioned meaning behind it. That's all that you can do, really. I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I stress that I'm myself from a multicultural family, and you know, I definitely do have the best of intentions when I write characters. I try to make sure that they are represented as best as I can, considering that I myself am Malaysian.
Yeah.
So that actually leads into the next question, which is, who was your favorite character to write or scene? That was the question. Character or scene?
So my favorite character, aside from Andrea, obviously, because Andrea is the comedic voice, right, is actually Linda. But Linda is just so outrageous, but she's actually based on a real life friend of mine, who is very pleased to be represented in the book. Yes. So Linda is based on a real life friend or friends, two friends. And she's like really fun, you know. She's like how I would want to be if I could be not me. You know, I want to be that character who's like so outrageous, who can say whatever. And yeah, there's that element of escapism when I'm writing Linda. Because Andrea is much more reserved, you know, she's like thinking all these thoughts, but most of it is in her head. And she's always been like a very, in a way, a conformist character, until she learns to break free, but I won't spoil the book. So for me, Linda's my favorite character to write. And my favorite scene for me comedically is the scene in the airport, but I won't spoil it for you because I love that scene so much because it's so funny. And I actually incorporate some stuff that I learned about worms while I was working with Doctors Without Borders in it. So yeah, keep an eye out for that scene because it actually is inspired by the work that Doctors Without Borders does in certain parts of used to do in certain parts of Africa. So yeah.
Thank you. And the last question before we wrap up for the evening, because we are very nearly out of time, is from Danny. And Danny wants to know about the covers behind you, Lauren, and whether or not you had any input into them, and whether you will know why publishers have different covers depending on where the book is released. So can you talk a bit about your beautiful covers? For everybody who's listening and watching, we in Australia have the cover that have the one that Lauren is holding up right now. So
this is the UK and the Commonwealth edition. This is by HarperCollins, and this is the one that you see in the US. This is by Putnam or Penguin Random House. So basically, the covers are very different, and they're I mean, it's a really good question, Danny, because I think they do a lot of like market testing and stuff like that, and they have like access to arcane knowledge that I don't have about preferences and things like that. But as I am Chinese and Asian, I do have to say that I do like the red of this novel very much. But I do like this novel too because it has this very like fresh and kind of like summery feel to it in its own way. And I have to say that like when I was presented both covers, separately, of course, by my publishers, I had only a very little input in the covers, to be honest with you, and that's something that a lot of debut authors don't know. But at least for the bigger presses, like you might not have that much input in the cover as you would think, and I didn't. But that's also because the covers are just so. This cover especially is just so great. It knocks it out of the park, right? And I might have changed a couple of things with the font and maybe like a couple of things with the layout, very minor things. But in general, like the covers are basically, you know, the great work of the artists involved, and I had very little say in them. But I think they both did a super job. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren, and thank you, Donald, for tonight's discussion. It's been absolutely wonderful. For everybody listening, I've posted the link that you can use to purchase your copies of Last Tang Standing from us at Avid Reader. Do either of you have any last comments that you'd like to make before we all log off? We're getting thank you messages in the chat box as well.
Well, I just wanted to thank Avid Reader Bookshop in Brisbane for hosting this, my unofficial Aussie launch. I hope very much to be able to come to Australia soon and see readers in real life and just like, you know, because I have Aussie family members as well, and I'm just so excited to be able to go back to Australia and meet readers that enjoy the book. So I hope you guys will enjoy the book if you haven't read it already. And thanks again, Donald. You're amazing, of course.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, pretty much, I'm pretty much all good to go. But massive thanks and love to Avid Reader to Lauren Ho as well. Matt, props to you guys as well. All right.
Thank you so much, Emma, Kate, and everyone, Chrissy, and everyone at Avid Readers. So thank you so much. Thank you, readers, for joining as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely rest of the evening. Good
Thank
night.
you. Bye.